Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's now 10 o'clock, so it's time to start this morning's session into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. My name's David Spencer, the planning inspector appointed to carry out the independent examination of the submitted plan. Can I just check, can everybody in the room hear me okay? Yep, good. Thank you. Just remind everybody to ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please. And can I turn to the council at this early opportunity to just set out, as per normal, the usual kind of key housekeeping matters, please. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if there is an alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exit, which is on the far side of this room, and then to the far side of the hotel car park. Toilets are in the corridor outside of this room to the left. Please note that there's cables taped to the floor, so please be careful when you're moving around the room. And also, if you have a car in the car park, please make sure you entered your registration number in the devices at the hotel reception. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I understand, is anybody present from the local press here this morning? Thank you. I should know your name by now, but just remind the room and myself who you are, please. Thank you very much. Just generally, I think looking around the room, a lot of people have been to these hearings sessions already, but just a gentle reminder that in terms of this independent examination, I am supported by Annette Feeney, the Independent Programme Officer. I've got to get my reorientated room. I've got to get my bearings. Is it on my right? Yep. Annette is your, as previous sessions, is first port of call if you've got any queries about the examination process or need to find any of the material. Annette's based here whilst we're sitting, and otherwise her details are on the examination website, and Annette will be supporting, I hope, the examination through to its conclusion and my report, so you may need to speak to Annette going forward. These sessions are being recorded and the council is uploading them onto its website after the sessions are concluded. Just to remind everybody to, again, please use microphones as we're going forward so that they're picked up as part of the recording and to help people in the room follow the discussion. Nothing further I want to say on that this morning. And then before we get on to the first session this morning is on matter 8 in relation to policies for economic development and for town centres. Just highlight, we're obviously now in the sort of the final week of the hearings for this examination. Obviously by virtue of doing a longer week last week, we have the benefit of a shorter week this week. But this week we've got some quite fragmented days where we're kind of covering bits and pieces of kind of various issues. So what I'm intending to do to accommodate those changes is we will take breaks at convenient points. So when we've finished a discussion on one point, probably have a sort of 10, 15 people at the table to be reset. So for example, after this discussion, we're going to talk about design. So we'll have a break, set up the table for design and carry on, etc. And we've probably got similar tomorrow morning as well. I would just like to say for the examination and for the session that's being recorded, I don't think it applies to anybody in the room, but I just wanted to flag it up at an early stage, and it may become more of an issue as we go forward over the next day and a half. The examination is now seeing a bit of a flurry of last-minute requests either to attend or to submit additional material and information. The examination is governed by various kind of procedures and indeed regulations, the Town and Country Planning Local Plan England Regulations 2012. There is a process and a protocol around additional evidence and material. I've set out at various points in my guidance notes, I'm not accepting late or unsolicited material. I'm looking at the council, but it's not an issue that the council has given me. But just say more widely, it is starting to become more of an issue in the last couple of days. There has to be fairness to everybody through this process. and late material that is not fair. It's not fair to me, it's not fair to the council or to potentially other participants. So my general rulings have been I'm not accepting it unless there is something there of either potentially a legalistic nature or something I feel needs to be addressed. Hence, I allowed the very late legal opinion before Christmas submitted by Mr. Latimer. Just like to again just remind everybody, I'm probably sounding very heavy-handed for first session. We will be moving after these hearings to a process where there will be proposed changes on the plan. There will be a 6-week consultation, and we'll be talking about the arrangements for that. So people will get another opportunity to comment where it relates to specific changes. But I thought I'd say that now. I may have to kind of revisit that as we go forward over the next day and a half. I appreciate we are getting to the last stages of the examination hearing process, and that may be sort of galvanising people to think, oh, I can just submit something now very late. I've just had another thought, I want to put this in. I'm afraid that's not how these examination process works. You have plenty of time since the matters, issues and questions back in September to submit statements. So just flag that up. So the first session this morning is in relation to economic development and town centres. It's matter 8. The only statement I have in front of me is from the local authority, so my discussion for this first part of today's hearings is solely with the council. And I look for their assistance on a number of points and questions that have been made. As part of previous sessions, I'm focusing in on whether there are any potential changes that might be made, but again, on any of the particular policies. But it's also, I think, just helpful for me, whilst I'm here in the room with council officers, to potentially understand why a policy has been developed in a particular way or what the evidence was that kind of helped to inform that policy. And we'll be using my agenda that's previously been circulated, which in turn reflects back on previously published matters, issues and questions. Before I invite the council's team to introduce themselves, are there any initial procedural questions or observations that need to be raised? No. Thank you. So for the purpose of this recording, if I can turn to my left and invite the council's team to introduce themselves, please.
So, good morning. My name is Paul Shadarevian, King's Counsel, acting for the council.
Good morning. My name is Matt Clifford. I'm a Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Good morning, I'm Deborah Lamb. I'm the Operations Manager for the Spatial Planning Team at South Tyneside Council.
Morning everyone, Robin Bullock, Public Health Practitioner within the Council's Public Health Team.
Morning everybody, my name's Ellie Forrester. I work in South Tyneside Public Health Team as a Senior Public Health Practitioner.
Thank you for that. So if we can turn to my agenda, and the first issue is around the policies that are going to support a strong and competitive economy. Relatively few representations on this, so that may be a reflection that the council is on a sound track in terms of what it's seeking to do. But I'd like to just pick up first item, and it's really to start with in relation to policy SP 17. Obviously at stage 1, we looked at the general amount of employment land required, the available supply, and then whether there were the exceptional circumstances in relation to site SP 14, the Wardley colliery site, so we're not going to revisit that. But nonetheless, the plan contains both strategic and non-strategic policies for sustainable economic development in the borough. Policy SP 17 kind of sets out the strategic picture, and the Port of Tyne and obviously port-related activity is recognised within that policy. But as I pick up at my MIQ 8.1, I ask whether it would be necessary within that policy to make a specific reference to the Tyne Dock Enterprise Park. And I think this reflects on representations from Port of Tyne.
Thank you, sir. We don't consider that it's necessary to make a reference to the Tyne Dock Enterprise Park specifically within the policy, given the strategic overall nature of the policy. However, we're quite open to making a modification to the supporting text to acknowledge that the Port of Tyne includes Tyne Dock Enterprise Park and that it benefits from enterprise zone status. So we feel that's sufficient to acknowledge the concern expressed by the Port of Tyne. The policy SP17 does acknowledge
Port of Tyne estate, or is it very specific and focused in on the enterprise park? Are you able to advise me on that?
My understanding is it's focused in on the enterprise park.
Thank you. And I see from the council's statement, and I appreciate the council has entered into a statement of common ground with Port of Tyne specifically, which has been in the examination library for some time now. In terms of the council's proposed modification to the supporting text, we'll come on to this tomorrow. There's kind of potentially two homes for changes. One is those that are genuinely needed for plan soundness, and those that are more a kind of a factual updating, or they don't materially affect how the plan is going to be implemented. Is the change that's put before me here, when I read it, I felt it instinctively was a minor modification. It's not something that's genuinely needed for plan soundness. Would that be the council's position?
Yes, sir, that is the council's position.
And then secondly, as picked up by my MIQ 8.2, policy SP18 in the plan sets out a portfolio of employment sites. Obviously, the International Advanced Manufacturing Park is not part of that, and we discussed at stage 1 how the plan has dealt with that cross-boundary strategic sites. But just more generally, when I ask at MIQ 8.2, and to give the council an opportunity to speak to this, are the sites that are identified in that policy justified and consistent with national policy in terms of being suitable to meet employment needs over the plan period, please?
Yes, sir. The employment site selection process is set out in the site selection topic paper. In terms of consistency with national policy, policy SP18 is consistent with MPPF paragraph 11 as it seeks to meet objectively assessed needs, and with MPPF paragraph 20 as it makes provision for employment development. It also aligns with the following text, which is included in the MPPF. Strategic policies should provide a clear strategy for bringing sufficient land forward and at a sufficient rate to address objectively assessed needs over the plan period, in line with the presumption in favour of sustainable development. This should include planning for and allocating sufficient sites to deliver the strategic priorities of the area, and that's MPPF paragraph 23. And the allocation of land for economic development is consistent with the need to support economic growth and productivity as set out in MPPF paragraph 81. So I referenced that the employment site selection process is set out in the site selection paper. I can, if you wish, go through that, but it depends whether that would be helpful or not.
I think at this stage I've got obviously the reference and the direction to that evidence, so that's I think helpful or sufficient at this stage. Thank you, Mr. Clifford. And just generally, as we kind of move forward with the plan, I appreciate the council's not putting forward at this stage any kind of specific changes to policy SP18, but obviously there's a lot of detail within there in terms of particularly land area available. Just trying to think strategically around other discussions, whether there's a need to just, before we get to main modifications, just sense check that those figures remain the figures, or am I being unduly nervous that, or anxious that there might be potential changes to some of those figures in policy SP18?
I think a sense check will be sensible. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just make a note to myself, that's something we'll just need to keep an eye on before we press go on main modifications. Thank you. Thank you. As I say, there's very little comment or representation on these sites, so very little, I think, for me to discuss. Is very little, I think, for me to discuss. And so, Mr. Clifford, I've got the site. Mr. Clifford, I've got the site selection process before me. In terms of then moving on to policy SP19, so we come back again to the theme of port and river related development. And I ask at my MIQ 8.3 whether that policy is generally justified and effective. I'm imagining this is a kind of a key strand to the economy of the borough, obviously seeking to make the kind of the most of that kind of geographical circumstance, and then specifically the policy supports green technologies within this area, and just to understand what that might entail. I think if I can just invite the council to kind of briefly respond to its answer to my MIQ 8.3. Yes, please. Yep.
So this was included at the request of the Port of Tyne. They considered defined within the supporting text, I think, to policy SP19 as to what green technologies comprise. So the Port of Tyne requested the policies extended to cover green technologies to encompass a wide range of business sectors and reflect market demand. And it's defined at paragraph 9.17 of the supporting text.
Thank you. And I see from that it's very much towards the renewable energy sector, so presumably that is either the manufacture or transportation of kind of turbine components or elements at this moment in time?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you. And then just a matter of detail then, so within the wider Port of Tyne area we've referred to earlier, there's then the specific proposal of the Tyne Dock Enterprise Park, and I ask at my MIQ 8.4 whether the wider policy, strategic policy at SP19 also encompasses the Tyne Dock Enterprise Park site, and whether that needs to be reflected on the policies maps. This is my MIQ 8.4.
Yes, sir, I can confirm that it does encompass Tyne Dock Enterprise Park, and we have therefore proposed an amendment to the policies map to clarify that that is the case.
I see, and it's effectively a kind of a finger of land along the sort of the river frontage, I think, going up to where the new houses are being built.
That's correct. It is a finger of land, as you say, which goes up towards where the Holborn development is taking place.
Thank you. Again, we'll come on to tomorrow about potential modifications to the policies map and ensuring kind of cross-reference so people can see and understand where these potential changes are being made. And then I ask at my MIQ 8.5 whether it would be necessary for soundness to positively allocate or identify further riverside land for ports and related river-related development, or whether things are going to be primarily focused at the Port of Tyne operations, or whether there's kind of flexibility elsewhere within the borough for suitable locations. And I think this is something we discussed at stage 1 when we were looking at the Roman Haas site in Jarrow that was put forward by others as an alternative housing site.
Thank you, sir. Except, as you mentioned, for the former Roman Haas site, no other available riverside land has been identified through our evidence base as deliverable for employment purposes. The industrial estate of Wagon Way Road has a riverside location, but it's in established general employment use. And the land bound by Priory Road and Church Bank, which is reference ED.5, has a riverside location, but it's safeguarded to allow for importation, processing and distribution of marine aggregates. The allocation of the Roman Haas site is for general economic purposes, but it does not preclude specialist port and river related uses if they were to come forward. So there is that flexibility, but we felt it was important to give it that overall flexibility. So to summarise, we don't feel there are other opportunities for specialist port and river related uses elsewhere in the borough that are deliverable.
Thank you. And just so I can get my bearings, if we go back to policy SP18, is the Roman Haas site in there but by another name?
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, sir. It is ED.6.
Thank you. And then finally, in sort of river-related matter or employment and river-related matters, asked at my MIQ 8.6, I think this has come from Historic England and site E35, which I think is within the wider area covered by policy SP19. Whether there needed to be further detail within policy SP19, or whether other policies of the plan would satisfactorily deal with, I think it's principally an issue around the setting of various kind of heritage assets. I don't know if the council wants to say anything further in relation to MIQ 8.6.
Thank you, sir. Development on E35 has the potential to result in less than substantial harm to the setting of the heritage assets identified in the Heritage Impact Assessment. However, the local plan policies, particularly those relating to heritage, design and landscaping, will ensure that development on the site is delivered in a manner that minimises and mitigates harm to the historic environment. So we feel that we have the policy framework to deal with that issue.
Thank you, and I note you've entered into a statement of common ground with Historic England, as set out at paragraph 817 of your matter 8 statement to that effect. So that's noted. And then in terms of having sort of positively identified sort of areas for economic development through those kind of three strategic policies. Kind of the other part of the equation is to then kind of protect employment areas where they serve a particular function and need, and that's obviously done through policy 22. Obviously various matters, issues, questions relate to this this policy. I'll start with MIQ 8.7, as this kind of straddles what we've been discussing around the port and then protecting existing employment uses. So whether it would be necessary for soundness, I think, to include further detail within policy 22 around the port of Tyne and specific kind of protection measures. I think I invite the council to speak to its response to MIQ 8.7, please.
We don't think it would be appropriate to include further detail in policy 22 specific to the port of Tyne. Policy 2 is a borough-wide policy, and the port of Tyne already has a very high innate degree of protection, and they're the owner of the estate as well. So we're not, we don't believe that policy 22 requires amendment specific to the port of Tyne. They already have a very high degree of protection and control over proposals for alternative uses should they wish to resist them. So as a state, policy 22 is a borough-wide policy. It would strike me as incongruous to flex it to have a specific reference to the port of Tyne.
Thank you. And then more generally, as you say, Mr. Clifford, policy 22 is a borough-wide policy, obviously reflecting or drawing on the evidence from the Employment Land Review and other sources. Ask at my MIQ 8.8 whether part 2 of the policy is consistent with national policy at paragraph 82, and it's probably subpart D of that paragraph in terms of kind of flexibility and thinking about kind of employment needs going forward. So the first part of the policy, I think, is recognised and understood from the employment and evidence. So where a site comes forward within one of the allocated employment areas, it's got to go through a 12-month marketing period if it wants to come out of employment use. In terms of the second part of the policy, what is the council seeking through this? Is it additional material or evidence that the existing use is not viable? So it's a separate kind of would it be a viability assessment, or perhaps a more judgmental kind of appraisal of whether the business and the unit is kind of viable as a going concern? And what potentially would be sought further than the 12-month marketing exercise?
So can I come back to you on specifically what we would seek in that situation?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It is intended actually to go further than criterion 1, in the sense that criterion 1 will be factual evidence of marketing and no interest. But of course, that marketing exercise has to be undertaken, but the lack of success of that marketing enterprise might be because of other factors. For example, an owner allowing a site to fall into disrepair or decay, for example. And there may be other issues affecting viability for particular employment uses, but not others. So what it does is expand the list of qualitative factors that may be taken into account without specifying what they are, because of course one can't anticipate them all.
I'll reflect on whether we're into main modification territory versus something that kind of assists the implementation of the plan, but is this an area where some further supporting text could just aid future users of the document?
I think that would help, actually, because you've raised an issue from your reading of the policy, and what we want to do is to explain how criteria 1 and 2 work. So I think that will be helpful.
And then finally from the Council on Policy 22, I think this is an issue that's been raised. Again, I think it's port of time, but it is perhaps a more widespread sort of borough-wide issue in terms of the agent of change principle that's reflected in the National Planning Policy Framework. Obviously, there are legitimate employment uses out there, and ensuring that they are protected or safeguarded in terms of what they're doing from sort of potential changes, particularly on existing employment areas, and ensuring that something doesn't kind of come forward in that area that's then going to harm the viability of other lawful businesses.
Thank you, sir. The agent of change principle, paragraph 187 of the NPPF states existing businesses and facilities should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them as a result of development permitted after they were established. The Council is fully supportive of this principle, as it wishes to support existing businesses as well as facilitate new investment. Part 4 therefore seeks to provide this balance by supporting changes of use within allocated employment areas where the applicant has clearly demonstrated that, quote, the operation would not prejudice the operation of neighbouring properties and businesses. So we feel it strikes an appropriate balance.
I hadn't raised on my agenda MIQ 8.10. This is the issue of obviously the plan, when looking more widely at the economy of the borough, is looking at kind of leisure and tourism as understandably a key aspect of the local economy. And part 3 of the policy is encouraging, I think, more water-based recreation and leisure, particularly on the River Tyne. Obviously been discussing significance of the port of Tyne to the local economy, and whether there was a potential issue or conflict between encouraging more leisure or recreational use in a commercial shipping channel. I don't have any sort of further questions on that. I don't think the Council, just before we move off kind of economy, whether there's anything further the Council wishes to say in relation to MIQ 8.10.
No, sir, I think we've set everything out in our response to MIQ 8.10. Thank you.
Thank you. And presumably there are people, bodies out there who would advise the Council if there was an issue in relation to the safe operation of the river. I don't know if there's something, harbour commissioners or people like that who will kind of be able to feed into the the development management process.
I would assume this issue may have come up in relation to the Holborn development, so I'd assume that there are bodies who can advise.
Port of time.
Thank you. And before I move on to retail, I'm going to sound like a newsreader and say, and finally, the council produced a very helpful. I'm afraid we're going off piste. It's not on my agenda, but the council produced a very helpful associated matters update paper at the end of October. It's document post sub 43 in the examination library. Now we've mentioned the international advanced manufacturing part. We looked at that part of stage 1 and whether it had any, how the plan has dealt with this issue, bearing in mind that's an area covered by its own area action plan. Understand the council's approach to employment land has been through this plan to kind of look to complement and support what is going on that cross-boundary location, but not necessarily to directly kind of compete with it or positively allocate further land that would kind of replicate or seek to what's sought to be achieved at that location. The council's paper refers to, obviously, the council's had for its local development scheme an objective to kind of update and review the area action plan, and through that update paper there was a reference to whether that's now necessarily going to go forward. I'm not entirely clear what bearing that may have for this plan, given obviously there is an adopted area action plan for the I'm going to slip back into the acronyms for the IAMP, or whether it's something for information for my purposes at this stage, and it will be a matter that will feed into plan review, which we'll again touch on tomorrow. Is it Mrs. Lamb?
Yes, that's right. So in the update paper, we set out that our South Tyneside Council, along with Sunderland, were sort of progressing a IAMP AAP, a new document for that area. As set out in the paper, progress on that review has paused at this point, and that still remains the case as it is. I think in terms of how that affects our local plan, I don't think it has any impact. I think we set out quite clearly at stage 1 where there was discussions about the relationship between the IAMP and the AAP and the policies in the plan, and we set out that there wasn't a connection. We have proposed some additional supporting text which sort of sets out that relationship slightly more clearly, but I think IAMP going forward will be something for future plan reviews, probably for both authorities, but I say it's fair to say there's a degree of flux in terms of plan making at the moment, so it's we'll see how things progress on that.
Can I just ask the council, if things do change or progress while we're still in examination, so before I potentially issue a report to the council, can I just request that the council just factually update me if a decision is made and something is changing, and just in case I've made a kind of a reference to there will be a future review and maybe that's not the case, I think it would be helpful to kind of be made aware of that if something does change. Yep. Okay, I've got nothing further on issue 1 on the economy, so thank you to Mr. Clifford for answering all those questions. I'm now going to move on to issue 2, ensuring the vitality of centres. And probably reflect with a slight tear in my eye to retail used to be such a big part of plan making and planning appeals, and it's obviously the landscape is changing, and but nonetheless very important that the plan has an effective policy framework around ensuring the vitality of centres within the borough. That's a requirement of national planning policy. And I ask at my MIQ 811 around policy SP20, which sets out a hierarchy of centres. And I think looking at the evidence, I understand and follow through that's a sort of seems a fairly logical approach, but ask at my MIQ 8.11 representation, or a representation has been submitted, that the C Winnings Way, which I'm going to describe as in Westow, but people may have a different geographical interpretation, should be a local centre, and whether it would be necessary for soundness to add it to criterion 3 of policy 20, please.
Thank you, sir. C Winnings Way at Westow Crown Village has been identified as a local neighbourhood hub rather than a local centre, and we consider that to be justified. The local centres and neighbourhood centres assessment concluded that C Winnings Way meets the definition of a local neighbourhood hub, being a small parade of purely local significance. So we don't feel it has sufficient significance to be classified as a local centre. That's based on the assessment work that was undertaken for that study.
Thank you for that. And in terms of my MIQ 8.12, just more widely, as I say, the landscape on kind of retail demand is changing, but is the policy framework, and we're looking here specifically at the strategic policy SP20, and then the council's kind of work through a number of non-strategic policies, 26, 27 and 28. Is that sort of framework justified in terms of the evidence that supports the plan? Please.
Sorry. Yes, sir. The evidence, it's based on the Stage 1 Town and District Local Centre study, and the hierarchy that's set out in limbs 1, 2 and 3 of the policy was directly informed by the Town, District and Local Centre study. The study confirmed the 3-tier hierarchy for South Tyneside. So we consider that's clearly evidence-based and reflects the existing situation, which was reviewed by the consultants, and they confirmed that that hierarchy maintains is still the valid hierarchy for South Tyneside.
Thank you. And then just a further reflection on policy 26 around the vitality and viability in the kind of the 3 hierarchies. Part 2 of the policy at criterion 4, the council seeking to kind of look at and carefully manage where clusters of uses arise. You see that at part 2 of policy 26, subpart 4. Does the council have in mind what kind of uses or cluster of uses it might be thinking of in terms of this part of the policy? I mean, often come across other authorities where they're thinking about things like hot food, takeaways, or they might be thinking about betting shops. Does the evidence kind of refer to kind of particular clusters that policy should be managing?
So I think it's the experience of the authority that clusters such as the kind of uses you describe are not necessarily conducive to the vitality of the centre. Obviously a balanced approach has to be taken because there is less utility in national planning policy now to control uses. But those are the kind of uses which we would probably seek to avoid a cluster of.
Thank you. I think I just wonder if similar to when we were looking at policy 22, I reflect on an area, this is a part of the plan where there might be a benefit of some further supporting text to kind of aid users of the document again in terms of what that might mean or refer to. Yep. Okay. And then just very briefly on policy 28, obviously the National Planning Policy Framework has a kind of default national kind of threshold for impact assessment at 2,500 square metres gross. Obviously this is a plan that's proposing a lower kind of local threshold. I don't think I'm aware of any soundness concerns that have been raised on that, but presumably that is evidenced by the latest retail evidence underpinning the plan. Mr. Clifford.
Yes, sir, it directly reflects the evidence underpinning the plan, the retail study.
Thank you. And obviously, National MPPF paragraph 90 obviously allows excuse me, allows for that. And in terms of the need for additional retail and main town centre uses over the plan period, this is my MIQ 8.3. What is the evidence? I think it's.
Thank you, sir. The plan does not identify any additional retail or commercial leisure floor space that would require the allocation of additional sites. The retail study does not identify any surplus capacity which could support additional convenience or comparison goods floor space within the short, medium and longer term. The retail study did not anticipate there would be any operator demand to bring forward large format leisure uses over the plan period. The study identified a requirement for 900 square metre of food and beverage floor space, which it anticipated will comprise relatively small scale cafes, restaurants and bars, which would generally be accommodated within the 3 principal centres and to a lesser extent the district centres. The study recommended that this requirement is met through the reuse and repurposing of vacant floor space, which is consistent with point 1 of policy 26. So to summarise, we don't feel we've got evidence for additional sites.
Thank you. And I think looking back, I think the only sort of additional provision I think the plan is making is a policy SP8 at Felgate, where as part of that development the policy is currently drafted, and I'll wait to see how the council potentially wants to kind of look again at that policy. It does envisage a local centre as part of that 1,200 home development, so that would be the only kind of new excuse me, kind of retail or yes, retail sort of community sort of centre within the plan.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah. Thank you. And now finally move on to hot food takeaways, and it's my MIQ 815. So policy 32 seeks to address this issue through the plan, through a number of mechanisms. A fairly frequent policy to be found in local plans. Obviously the planning practice guidance kind of allows, a national policy allows for this where evidenced and kind of justified. I suppose if I invite the council in the first instance to kind of just perhaps briefly kind of set the scene to why a policy on hot food takeaways is needed in a South Tyneside context.
Thank you. So just to give an overview from a health perspective, we have identified childhood obesity within our health and wellbeing strategy as one of our key priorities. And the reason for that is because we have a national programme called the National Child Measurement Programme, which weighs and measures children in reception and year 6 every year. And that is a database that we monitor on a yearly basis. And just to give an overview of our position in South Tyneside, our Year 6 obesity prevalence is significantly higher than the England average and the regional average, and we are actually, based on the most recent 24-25 release, the highest in the region for Year 6 obesity prevalence. So the hot food takeaway policy therefore seeks to address that by limiting the number of hot food takeaways. And the reason for that is because we know that the environment does impact on obesity within the area. And what I would say from a health perspective is that the hot food takeaway is one intervention as part of a wider suite of interventions which look to work simultaneously to address obesity in the local area. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a long time since I was in school. Year 6, what does that mean to an old fuddy-duddy like me?
10 to 11 years old.
So that's starting high school.
Yes.
Yeah. And in terms of the policy and how it's kind of intended to work, so I say come across this type of policy fairly frequently now, and as you're saying, if the evidence is around, particularly that kind of start of high school kind of age cohort is where the issue is being particularly identified. You're set out in the policy in terms of the 400-metre radius from secondary school entry points, so and that's mapped in the local plan itself. So obviously the various kind of large parts of the borough that wouldn't be affected by that criterion. The other part of the policy refers to where it would be an award where levels of obesity in Year 6 pupils is over 10%, and then the council helpfully sets out in the statement, I think, a bar chart. I'm assuming that is covering, it's at figure 2, I think, of the statement, and I'm assuming they are all the wards in South Tyneside?
Yes, that's right.
And then if I look at that bar chart, so all the wards are over 10%.
Yes, that's right. So that's based on the 23-24 data. We have just received the 24-25 data, but we don't have the ward breakdown yet. But we can provide that once we've got that. But yes, all over 10%.
So as things currently stand on the evidence through that policy, there would be no further hot food takeaways?
That's right. So we would intend to respond to all hot food takeaway applications because obviously the 10% threshold would be met.
Obviously it won't affect existing uses. They're there, they're safe, they can continue to operate. Just in terms of kind of the reasonableness or the justification around the 10% figure, bearing in mind what it could potentially mean. I appreciate monitoring might change that scenario. How's the 10% figure been arrived at? Again, is that justified?
So the 10% figure is sort of a following forward of the SPD that we currently have, which was adopted in 2017. So that was produced based on the evidence that was available at the time then, and also follows the Gateshead hot food takeaway SPD, which also implemented a 10%. So for consistency reasons, in terms of the local area, we also adopted that 10% threshold, which, like I say, has been followed forward into this policy at this point.
And are you able to advise Mrs. Lamb in terms of that 10% figure, if you had that tested through the development management process? Has that been scrutinised, supported?
Yes, so the SPD has been used since it was adopted in terms of determining plan applications for hot food takeaways. I do have a little number here of the number of applications which have been refused since that was adopted. So in total, since 2017, we've had 29 applications for hot food takeaways, 10 of which were refused, 11 withdrawn, and 8 were granted plan permission. Those that were granted plan permission were either in areas where in the LDF there was a policy which identified A5 uses as being suitable in that location. So obviously the SPD couldn't trump that, so it was an acceptable use through that. Others have been sort of associated with mixed use proposals. So there could be a restaurant with a hot food takeaway element where it's been ancillary to that. So it's been approved, and others have been sort of associated with lawful development certificates as well. So the SPD has been used through the DM process. But like I say, there has been occasions where those uses have been granted plan permission as well.
Thank you. So if a hot food takeaway proposal passes through the high bar of being in a ward area where there isn't the 10% of year 6 pupils who are identified as obese, it's in a suitable location, I think beyond 400 metres from a secondary school entrance. It will then have to go through other criteria. So criterion 2 says they'll be assessed in terms of their impact on the vitality and viability of the shopping centre or the centre where it will be located. I just wonder whether invite the councillors to whether that's justified. Obviously restaurants, drive-through restaurants are main town centre uses. Does the council have a view in terms of why hot food takeaways would have to go through this extra?
Yes, so it sort of touches on what we've been speaking about in terms of clustering and sort of the negative effects that these sort of uses could end up causing in town centres and in shopping districts across the borough. So that's really what those limbs of the policy are there to manage. So if an application does, say, pass through the earlier limbs of the policy, they would then start to look at the impacts on vitality and viability of the areas. And also we've got sort of the meaning aspects as well, which are set out in criterion 4 of the policy.
And then in terms of criterion 3 of the policy, there's obviously some specific factors there. I mean, it's kind of got echoes back to when we were talking about houses of multiple occupation in terms of number of uses within a particular area or frontage. Has that been drawn through from the SPD and now embedded in development plan policy? Just to understand how some of those criterion in part 3 of the policy have been developed.
They've been drawn on from the existing DM3 policy, which is in our development management DPD at the moment.
Thank you. And if I was to kind of come away from this session with kind of thoughts in my mind or reservations in my mind about kind of the justification for parts of this policy and whether it was being sort of too stringent on hot food takeaways, what would is there anything the council would say in terms of, for want of a better phrase, watering down of the policy, what the potential kind of adverse impacts of that could be for South Tyneside? Is the issue, I think as I was told earlier, you are the regionally the highest for this year group.
Yeah, so I think when we look at our childhood obesity figures, they have been increasing year on year. And I think our concerns, if the policy was watered down, would be that we would continue to see an increase in those obesity figures. And we are very clear that the policy itself isn't going to solve childhood obesity, but actually we need to look at it as part of our whole systems approach to obesity, in which that would form part of our approach within public health.
And are you able to just briefly advise, or just to tell me, what some of these kind of other, when you say it's a whole systems approach, and you mentioned earlier this policy is one intervention of several, and I think the planning practice guidance refers to kind of looking holistically at what's being done. What kind of other measures that are being looked at that this policy would fit into and complement, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about a whole systems approach, we look at everything from the environment, so that would cover the likes of hot food takeaways, unhealthy advertising, etc., to the individual themselves, so looking at physical activity, both from an environmental perspective as well as trying to encourage people to make better choices around their physical activity. We also have a large body of work happening around sustainable food, so trying to improve the access to food within South Tyneside, but also we look at cooking demonstration classes to equip residents with the skills to be able to cook sustainable and healthy food. There's a whole body of interventions that form part of that kind of wider system working. Thank you.
Thank you. And just finally, on an operational front, obviously the council will have its local plan in terms of managing and guiding development. Obviously, here got two colleagues this morning from public, so the council itself has the direct kind of public health role and responsibility in terms of implementing some of these things that you've referred to. Yep.
Yeah, so as a public health team, we would facilitate that whole systems approach, but obviously we rely on a number of our partners to support us with that, because it is a massive agenda and does require a multi-agency approach.
Thank you. I've got no further questions on hot food takeaways, so I think that brings matter 8 to its conclusion. Thank you for that. What I'm going to suggest now, just before I move off from this, is there anything further from the council that it wanted to raise in relation to matter 8? No. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11 o'clock. The next item for this morning. It's just gone 11 o'clock. The next item for this morning, we're going to jump to matter 9, and it's specific issue of design. It's just gone 11 o'clock. I'd like to be back in this room at just check with Annette. It's 11:15. Yep, 15:15. I'll have a break and then we'll resume the discussion. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11:15, so it's time for me to start this hearing session into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. I won't introduce myself. I think looking around the table and from various hearing sessions, most people will know now who I am. We are here for discussion on, it's part of the wider Matter 9 agenda, but it's specifically issue 4, and it's relating to matters of design and the design policy for the borough. Again, just ask people to ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please. As indicated previously, these sessions are being recorded, so if people can use their microphones when making submissions, that would be helpful for people in the room and also to kind of those who are watching the recordings. Does anybody wish to make their own or separate recording of this discussion? No. In which case, if I can start on my left with the council to just introduce who will be speaking for this subject, please.
So, good morning. My name is Paul Shadarevian Casey, acting for the council.
Rachel Cooper, Senior Plan and Policy Officer at South Tyneside Council.
Rhiannon Laverick, and I'm one of the Planning Policy Officers at South Tyneside Council.
Andrew Inch, Senior Manager for Planning at the Council.
Chris Martin, Home Builders Federation, a representative body of the house builders in England and Wales.
Mark Murphy from Pegasus Group, representing Bellway Homes.
Morning everyone, Joe Thompson on behalf of East Bolton Neighbourhood Forum.
Good morning, Mervyn Butler, Clean East Bolton Labour Party.
Thank you. Now we're going to work through an agenda that's previously been circulated for Matter 9 Issue 4. We're looking at mainly Policy 47 in terms of the design principles. It's quite a long policy, but it is probably reflective of the significance of securing high quality design as part of the planning system. Now, I hadn't, as part of my agenda, referred to, there are 2 further MIQs that I'd published. One was in relation to tree-lined streets, and another was in relation to local design guides. I am going to allow discussion on those, but we'll deal with those 2 points after we've gone through the 3 items that I had on my agenda, and we'll link back to those MIQs at that after we've at the end of the discussion. So if I can turn first then to the issues that I've identified really as a reflection of what's been raised as soundness concerns through the various representations. And the first area I wanted to explore, reflected in my MIQ 921, was about the effectiveness of the policy when it refers to, I think it's in part 6 of the policy, when we're looking at homes and buildings, that it would provide good quality internal environments with adequate space for users, and what adequate space meant, and whether it was meaning one of the optional technical standards in terms of the nationally described space standards. So perhaps I can turn to the council in the first instance to kind of just explain what part 6 of the policy is seeking to achieve, please.
Yeah, so the plan and that specific policy don't have a specific requirement in terms of nationally described space standards. The plan elsewhere does have a range of policies which seek to achieve good design and provide a mix of housing types and sizes. In terms of the sort of ambiguity around that part of the policy, we have proposed a modification to the supporting text under question 9.21 in the hearing statement, and that just intends to provide a little bit of clarification around what we mean in terms of internal space.
Thank you. And in terms of that modification that's been put forward, if others haven't had the opportunity to refer to it, it's not prescribing the nationally described space standards, but it's signposting people to that they exist and regard should be had to them.
Yeah, that's correct. And the Council considers that other policies within the plan, such as Policy 21 and the design policies, have an impact on internal floor space, and obviously regard should be had to them as well.
Thank you. So if ultimately a scheme comes forward that's at slight variance to the nationally described space standards, but would otherwise, in the Council's judgment, provide for an adequate space for users, it would satisfy the requirements of the policy. There's flexibility.
Yeah, that's correct.
And just very briefly, in terms of what's been happening in South Tyneside and through monitoring, even if the policy didn't require nationally described space standards, and probably just for the benefit of the room, I guess most people are aware of, they are optional technical standards, so they're not mandatory, they're not something that councils have to introduce. But nonetheless, if one was concerned more widely about this issue, should we be, or is actually what's happening on the ground pretty close to the space standards in any event?
Yeah, so as part of the hearing statements, we did a review of some recently permitted developments, and it found that there wasn't a significant variance from NDSS in terms of what has been permitted and what is being developed on the ground.
Thank you. Before I bring in others, if I can turn to, I'm going to call you the development sector, or representatives for the wider development sector. When I look at the Council's evidence and monitoring, it's revealing that there isn't a significant variance from the nationally described space standards. I'm fairly clear, Mr. Martin, and from Mr. Murphy, I think your position is there's no need for soundness reasons to introduce a specific requirement to meet this standard. Is what I'm seeing in terms of the Council's evidence a reflection that the sector and the market has products that meet this in any event, because some authorities do seek nationally described space standards? So I'm presuming as house builders will have certain kind of products that are going to meet, whether, if that applies, I don't know, not going to say Gateshead have introduced it, but just more locally or regionally, if other authorities have that kind of product. Policy requirement.
Thank you. So yeah, if I may come in, I think there's a, as a body, we represent a wide variety of house builders, as I've mentioned previously, sort of the large PLCs and the smaller and medium sized house builders, and they all have slightly different models as to how they work. So whilst there might well be a lot of house builders that only offer sort of NDSS type house types, there will be other house builders which do not, and it's usually driven by their business model and how they operate. The reason why a house builder may not want to go with NDSS is simply it's about choice, it's about affordability as well. So in areas where there is affordability issues, if you're requiring NDSS, inevitably that means the houses tend to be a bit more expensive because they are a bit larger. The issue sometimes our members have come across is if you're in an area of where the affordability is an issue, you may well have a family who are wanting a 3 or a 4 bedroom house, but in that area, and as a result of the NDSS, they might only be able to afford a 2 bedroom house. Then that creates an issue potentially of overcrowding within houses, which then sort of is the antithesis of what NDSS is trying to achieve in the first place. So some of our members have NDSS house types, but they also have non-NDSS house types, and it just very much depends on the market that they're aiming for. In this case, if I may sort of add to that. I'm happy that the council have clarified that in this case there would not be a requirement for NDSS. Obviously, there's the PPG and the tests in the PPG that would need to go through to justify a move towards NDSS. That I haven't seen in the council's evidence base, and they obviously acknowledge it in their hearing statement that the evidence isn't there, because it's not just saying X amount of houses have been built to NDSS standards or not NDSS standards. It's to do with the outcomes of that as well. So are the people moving into those non-NDSS houses, are they happy with the size of those houses? You know, usually there's a bit of research there as to what the outcomes are. It's not good enough, in my view, just to say, well, houses haven't been built to NDSS, therefore NDSS is needed, because they might be suitable for the needs of those people who are living there. Where I potentially differ from the council's view and what's in a hearing statement is, I think putting something in like having regard to NDSS, the danger with that is it muddies the waters a little bit, and it would be then, I can foresee instances potentially where development management officers might have different interpretations of what has regard to means. You know, you have this often when you have policies like that which aren't definitive. You may get some DM officers who will want to have that, you know, apply that rigorously. You might have others who might take a bit more relaxed view. So it's to do with the effectiveness of putting that in. I think either you go for NDSS or you don't, and I think the policy at the moment is a bit of a muddle and could muddy the waters. That's just my comment on that change. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As indicated earlier, I was quite clear from the statements and representations, the view from the Home Builders Federation in terms of not needing to go down the route of nationally described space standards. Mr. Murphy from Bellway's perspective.
I'm mainly going to be reiterating the point of Mr. Martin in terms of there are going to be instances where it's appropriate not to prescribe NDSS standards be incorporated within house types. And also, I would also echo my concerns about including that supporting text within the policy, just because you might be trying to secure NDSS by the back door, in the fact that they might, when it comes to the planning application stage, if they're having regard to NDSS standards, then they might actually, as Mr. Martin states, actually strictly apply those standards as part of the processing of applications. Thank you.
Thank you. And on the other side of the equation, I have the representations from East Bolden. So I'll hear first from Mr. Thompson at the forum, and then from Mr. Butler. And I think, Mr. Thompson, from your organisation's perspective, you're going to refer me to Cleedon Lane as a practical example of why nationally described space standards should be a policy requirement.
Yes, thank you, sir. We have submitted now a detailed response to your question, an appendix which sets out that evidence that you mentioned. I'd just like to talk about three main points with regard this really